G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and I did have another video I was going to put out, but I might drop it today, maybe tomorrow, we'll see how I'm going. Instead, I wanted to quickly do something to talk about the pricing updates, because Games Workshop has graced us with yet another price rise. So, interesting fact, if we look at the world's oldest website from the layout of it, I mean, this is positively 1990s, this US Bureau of Labor Statistics website, but real world average hourly earnings increase in the United States was only 0.6%, seasonally adjusted inflation from March 23 to March 24, so over the last year. And 0.6%, you put that into some perspective, right? That's very, very, very little wage growth, especially compared to, the cost of living increases. And yet over at Games Workshop, we're getting a 3 to 5%, according to their article, price increase on average. Unless you're in Norway and Sweden, then you get an 8 to 14% price increase. Now, I just need to double check the maths on this, but I'm pretty sure 0.6% wage growth is significantly different to 3 to 5% price increases. I get that Games Workshop is a profit-driven company, that all companies are, let's face it, and that they have shareholder obligations. This is true. But also there is something to be said for not pricing yourself out of the market. It's already an incredibly expensive hobby, and it's not getting any cheaper. And the worst part of this is, if you plot it out on a graph, the Games Workshop price rises, they're pretty much what you would call exponential. If you had two graphs, the one that is basically showing inflation over time for the country compared to the actual cost of Games Workshop product. Games Workshop's product is soaring up far faster in price than inflation is. And the reason I think this is because Games Workshop has hemorrhaged so many players over the years. And people don't get it when I talk about this. I say that Games Workshop is not in the great financial position that they think it is, despite a constant influx of new players. Because what's happening is players are coming along, they make their sort of one-off purchases, but then they're not hanging around long term. A lot of people come in, buy their starter set, they've got initial hype and drive, and then it just sort of falls by the wayside. And you have this one group of fans who are super passionate and buy everything, and they're addicted to the FOMO and the hype and all that, and they buy everything, but it usually just sits in boxes in their house, and they form a very small percentage of the community. You have a lot of people who are like myself who have basically checked out of purchasing. I'll buy the occasional book, and that is it now. Because, hey, I'm on a decent wage. My wife's on a decent wage. We have large, beautiful, brand new house, and yet it is so prohibitively expensive, we won't buy into it. And I think what's happened is basically the prices are going up so fast, and the game is becoming so unattainable, especially at the rate of increases, that people can't keep up. And what you get is this situation where the company still appears on the surface to make profit because they make so much money compared to what it actually costs to make, manufacture, and distribute the product. They make so much money off that it's making up the gap, the shortfall between people coming and people going. And the analogy I've used many times over the past, but I'll use it again here because there'll be people who haven't watched this channel before, is that imagine Games Workshop started out and they were selling, let's say it was $1 for one model, all right? Never was, but hypothetical. They sell these models and they're $1 and you get a model. And this is great. And they sell 100 models a day and they make $100 out of their sales, right? And then what happens is there's some price rises, some inflation, all that kind of thing. So they turn around and they say, you know what, we're going to sell models for $2 a day. Now the fans, they're not huge on this. That's doubling the cost of the product. It's expensive. And the amount of people buying the model goes down. But most people sort of, they understand that, okay, we get it. you've got to meet all these pricing criteria and such, so we'll hang around. So 75% of the players hang around, but 25% go. Out of the 75% of people that hang around buying these $2 models, now the company's making $150 a day. So they're making more than they were before. Fantastic, right? But then what happens is the company goes public, and they've now got shareholders, and they need to increase their profits. So they say, well, we are selling less product than ever, so we've removed that overhead, but we're making more money than ever as well, and all it took was a $1 price rise. What if we did another $1 price rise? The first time out, that was a 100% price rise, but this time, that's only a 50% price rise, so it's half as much as last time, and we can justify it with whatever spin we want. So they increased the price from $2 to $3 a model. Now remember, with 75% of the people still buying it, 75 people a day, buying $2 models, they made $150 for the day. But now, people are a bit annoyed at this. They go, well, I don't want to be paying for $3 a model. So it drops, and more people leave the hobby, and there's only 50 people left now, instead of the 75 they started with. And those 50 people, they're buying the $3 models. The company makes $150. They just made the same amount as they did when they were selling them at $2 a model, but had more players. And the only upside for the company here is, well, as long as they didn't spend the resources on producing the extra 25 models they thought they would still have, well, then they're kind of golden. But the company sees this and they go, well, this is not what we wanted. We wanted to sell more and make more profit to impress our shareholders and to keep the dividends coming out and to get all that shareholder money coming in. Well, let's increase it by yet another $1. And this is even less. This is only a 30% price rise, because last time it was a 50%. The time before that, it was a 100% price rise. So they go up to $4 a model. And now half of the remaining players again leave. So you're down to 25 players out of the original 100 who started. But the problem is, even at $4 a model, with only 25 people supporting it, they only make $100 a day. So now they're making the same money they made when they sold 100 a day, but they've turned their community into an absolute shell of itself. This to me is Games Workshop in a nutshell. It's a company that has sold so many models in the past to so many people who are happy with it, but then they just kept the prices increasing and increasing, despite no real need for them to increase, especially for things that are paid off. Now, Games Workshop, I can't prove this beyond a shadow of a doubt, but I've spoken to insiders, and typically it's agreed that when Games Workshop first releases a product, that first release cycle, the product pays for itself. Essentially, it's all baked into the cost, and the design costs, the machining costs, the mold costs, the materials costs, everything is covered. So if they release a box game like Leviathan, okay? They release Leviathan, that initial run of boxes, that first set that goes on sale, that once it's sold out is gone, that has paid for the product in its entirety. So it is pure profit for every box they sell over that point, and they're already making profit on that first set. And this makes a lot of sense, because if you have a $70,000 or $80,000 die or mold, and you only have to sell 1,000 kits, right? You only have to slap $70 onto each kit. If you sell 10,000 kits, it's $7 per kit, right? So the more kits you produce and sell and all of that, the quicker you earn down the cost of that die. And that's just the raw cost. It's not including things like design fees and other ancillaries in the background, which I've spoken about in the past. But in Games Workshop's case, they'll keep products in basically production for decades. We see that now with the Old World, for example. We have dies that were produced in the late 90s or the early 2000s. 2003 is a very common year for many of the products that they're producing for the Old World. And yet they are charging 2020's prices. But it's like, hang on a minute. You don't have to factor the cost of that mold into it anymore. Okay, maintenance of the mold you do, but the maintenance is a very, very small percentage of, like you chuck 1 cent onto each box you sell, you've paid for your mold costs, right, for the maintenance. We have these old kits in production, and they don't drop the price. Now, this goes against basically the rest of human industry. And I mean all of human industry. If you take something like fighter jets, for example, when a fighter jet model first comes out, brand new, right? When those first F-35 Joint Strike Fighters rolled off the Lockheed Martin production line, they cost over $170 million a pop. And yet, over time, so many people have now bought them, the process has become more streamlined, the staff are fully trained that are working on the production lines, the industrial military complex that supports it was all run up to speed. Now it's $135 million per fighter jet. They've dropped nearly $40 million in price. They've dropped about a quarter of their price because that's what happens. It's the scaling over time economically. And many businesses rely on this. It's often baked into their prices when they bid for things like government contracts. They'll say, look, we're going to pick a price point where we know we're going to make money, and it might actually be a little bit lower than what it's initially going to cost us to make something. They might know that the first 100 of something they make are going to cost $1,000 each, but they say, you know what, we know after the first 100, it's only going to cost us $750 each, so if we charge $900, we'll make a loss on the first 100, but we're going to make excellent profit for everyone thereafter once we get our production up and running. That's kind of the idea of it. Games Workshop is the opposite of this approach. They do not decrease the price of things. Instead, once they've picked a price point for a product, it stays at that price point, and not only that, it will increase in price every year thereafter, based on the fact that, hey, it has to go up. That's the rules at the company. So that's how we ended up in this situation with something like the Khorne Berserkers, who went out of production just over a year ago. It was a kit from 1998, I think it was. It was either 97, 98, 99. 98's in the middle. It's 98. So it's a kit from 1998, and yet it had continuous price rises for 20 years. Over 20 years. In fact, about 24 years. That's an incredible amount of time to be increasing the price on a product which, you know, the designers were paid off, and remembering the changes with prices and inflation and all of that, the people who paid and who were paid, I should say, and sculpted that kit and designed it in the 1990s, their labor costs then, compared to the amount of money the kit is making now, it is far and away earned its money back. And this is a problem we see, of course, with Games Workshop. I've also shown spreadsheets in the past I've done up where I've taken figures from various White Dwarf magazines showing the exponential rise in Games Workshop prices, how it far outstrips inflation, and just to an insane factor, let alone the materials costs, where we notice that things like plastic miniatures are costing more than white metal miniatures that they're replacing. And yet the white metal itself is a medium that is 11 times more expensive to 17 times more expensive depending on the quality of the white metal, which is insane, especially when you consider, when you sort of take into account the figures of that white metal is a basically hand-produced process. Someone has to get a ladle of molten metal and pour it into the spin casting machine, physically pull out the mold, physically demold the products from it, clean the mold, put new mold release into it, re-prep it in the spin casting machine, check all of those individual white metals for defects, melt down the ones that are no good, and so on. That's a process. Whereas plastics, it's hit the button, machine goes, and all that's required is a person to help with the stacking of the sprues and give it a glance to make sure the quality is there on the parts that come off the sprues. That's why plastic injection molding is used. It is such a quick and painless process once it's set up. It will absolutely pump out parts all day long. Yes, machines can have breakdowns. Yes, there can be issues with them that need fault finding and problem solving and all of that. That is not unique to Games Workshop, though. That is a commonality of all plastic injection molding machines. Sometimes the extruder clogs, sometimes there's contamination inside the screw, sometimes the plastic itself is melting at a slightly different point, sometimes the master batch doesn't mix in correctly. Yes, okay, there's a whole bunch of things that can go wrong with the machines. But they're so minimal, you're never going to realize, right? Especially when you're in a manufacturing environment with dozens of machines producing millions of parts a day. And yet somehow the plastics process is costing more than that manual white metals process. It shouldn't be. But Games Workshop as a company has gotten away with this for so long, the player base just thinks that this product is so expensive to produce. It's an oft-touted tagline that, well, you don't understand how expensive a plastic injection mold is. Well, I do. I made them for a living, priced them, all of that. I was a production manager for a plastics company for a while. And I understand everything that goes into the process. It is not that expensive. And when you find out what they're paying some of their staff, as little as £17,000 per annum for some staff, that's nothing money. Absolute nothing money. All of the money that's being generated is going into shareholder dividends because they're trying to drive prices up because, well, if you're at the top of a company, and this is not just for Games Workshop, it's true for any major corporation, many of the people in the upper management don't get their money in pay as actual money. They often get it as share or stock options. So they get given a bunch of company stocks each year in addition to their actual earned income. And then they get to do what they want basically with those stocks. There may be time limits on when they can sell it and how much they can sell at any one time as part of their agreement. But you'll get things like the outgoing chief financial officer who sells a ridiculous amount of her stock. Well, why'd she do that? It's because she's just going to make a bunch of money instantly from selling all of those stocks, which is great for her because she's going to go on and have a lavish retirement with it. Or if she moves on to another company, she's going in with a lovely nest egg and a brand new car and house and all of that sort of thing because she had a lot of stock. But it's in the interest of these people running the company to keep the cost of those stocks as high as possible. Because really, really expensive stocks in the company mean that when they sell their shares, they make more money than if the stocks are worth very little. I mean, that's obvious, that's common sense, I think everyone can see that. But the problem here is that they then prioritize essentially their own financial well-being over their company. That's what's really happening. And with Games Workshop, we have a company which is not looking at its long-term health. I believe this is a dead company in the 2040s because they have prioritized FOMO practices, cashing in on the moment, as opposed to long-term sustainability and growth. And they're doing everything they can to cut costs to the point where there are no costs left to cut and slash. You can't go down from one-man stores. You either close the stores or you bring in a new person with no experience who you have to pay less than your existing managers. That's basically all that can be done there, right? As one example of the cost cutting they've done. And so they're looking for other ways to make their money. And this, the annual price rise that is higher than inflation year on year, that's one of the ways that they do it. I think it's a very scummy practice. They are not the only ones who do it, and it's very understandable why they do it. But if you're like myself and you're looking at the long-term health of the hobby and you're saying, like, hey, how are you going to make this sustainable so that future generations can buy in and it's not just the most affluent among us in society? I think they've done everything possible to make sure that it's the opposite of that, that only the affluent can buy in. This is not a game where you could go in as a teenager, that time in life where you have the most free time, the most wide-eyed wonderment of the world, the best imagination, right? That peak point in your life where Warhammer is going to mean the most is when you're that sort of 13 to 16-year-old age group, right? That group can't buy this hobby anymore. It is well beyond what they can afford. All Games Workshop can do is try and target the parents, but the parents, they're hurting financially, right? It's never cost more than it has now to raise a kid, and wages have never been worse than they are now compared to what you can actually buy with the money you're earning. Inflation is up dramatically worldwide, from a career cast of politicians who have no right to the positions they're in, who overspend all of our money, who have no fiduciary responsibility, and who will suffer no repercussions for their actions. So Games Workshop is just one more piece on the tail end of all of that, and I don't think it's sustainable long term. Anyway, that's it from me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching. Leave your thoughts and comments below the video. And please, I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.